All right,
notice. My name is David Moore. I'm the police chief for Janesville, and I'm here to discuss the status of Sergeant Brian Donohue. The police department learned of potential domestic violence issues between Sergeant Donohue and his wife, Mrs. Donohue, on October 24th of this year. The department conducted an internal investigation which revealed no domestic violence occurred, and services were offered for Mrs. Donohue. Sergeant Donohue feared that another false accusation of violence could occur, so he took precautions to reduce the likelihood of a false police report. A domestic violence incident was reported on September 23rd of this year. Sergeant Donohue was placed on administrative leave. And I have to tell you, when we place an officer on administrative leave, that means we take away his badge, we take away his gun, we take away his arrest powers. He is not allowed in the police station, nor is he allowed any email access. We requested the Rock County Sheriff's Department to investigate the criminal allegation, and the Janesville Police Department investigated the internal investigation. The Rock County Sheriff's Department arrested Sergeant Brian Donohoue for domestic-related battery on September 25th. Shortly after that arrest, in fact just a few hours, we had a press conference here in this room and announced to all of you that arrest and the circumstances of that domestic violence allegation. This morning, District Attorney David O'Leary reviewed the criminal investigation and decided that no charges would be filed on the matter, and it has been dropped. The police department's internal investigation revealed credibility concerns with Mrs. Donohue before and after the alleged domestic violence issue. There will be no discipline of Sergeant Donohue, and he will return to work this next Monday, October 13th. So with that, I'm sure you have some questions, but I will tell you one area that is off limits that I will not answer any questions on, and that is any health issues of Mrs. Donohue, with the exception of the injuries related to this incident.
Sergeant Donohue feared another false report. Could you expand on that?
Right. You know, we viewed the first report, and the internal investigation showed that there was no domestic violence issues. Mrs. Donohue was concerned for her safety, and one could perceive that to be a report, but what he was concerned with was a false police report, which ultimately came on October 23rd.
And that report came from?
I'm sorry, September 23rd.
That report on September 23rd came from whom?
Yeah, that was reported to us by a roommate and came to the Janesville Police Department.
A roommate of Mrs. Donohue?
A roommate of Mrs. Donohue's, yes. She had moved out of the family home, was staying with another person, and that person contacted the police department. And once we learned of that report, that's when we asked for the assistance of the Rock County Sheriff's Department.
Typically in a domestic abuse or violence situation, there has to be some sign of violence. The sheriff's office said she had signs of a bruise above her eye. Any idea how she got that?
We do not know how she received that.
Are you confident it wasn't from Sergeant Donohue that was originally claimed?
I can tell you that the evidence in this case, let me rephrase that. There's only two people that know what happened in this case, and that's Mr. and Mrs. Donohue. There were no other witnesses. They have different stories as to what occurred, so truly there's only two people that know exactly what happened. I can tell you that we then look at the evidence, and we then look at the credibility of the witnesses, and based on that evidence and based on that credibility of witnesses, that resulted in the district attorney not filing charges against Sergeant Donohue, and has resulted in this agency not pursuing discipline in this matter, and he'll be back to work Monday morning.
Are there any other bruises Mrs. Donohue sustained besides, or injuries besides above the eye?
There was one bruise about the eye, there was one bruise about the hip, and then a number of days later she reported a cracked rib, but there was no bruising lined with the cracked rib, and we don't know if the injuries were related.
So she did not, the wife of Sergeant Donohue did not call in the report then, it was her roommate?
Correct.
When you say he feared another false allegations and took precautions, what are those precautions? Like, what did he do?
Yeah. One of the things he did was, to the degree he could, he left his duty weapon here, so there could not be an allegation that he had drawn the weapon improperly or something of that nature. And Sergeant Donohue also limited his contact with Mrs. Donohue after that first internal investigation.
That was after August 24th and before September 23rd?
Correct.
They both agree that they were together in the same space when whatever happened?
They do not. Mrs. Donohue is insistent that she was at the home and that Sergeant Donohue had come home, assaulted her, and then left. Sergeant Donohue states, and he's as insistent, that he did come to the home, used the restroom, got a can of pop, and returned back to the police department. So Mrs. Donohue says the two were together. Mr. Donohue says that they were not.
So
This is the home that they shared, not the place where she was staying?
Correct, the home that they share.
And he says he didn't see her there?
Yes, that's correct.
Do you have the name of Sergeant Donohue's wife, her first name?
It's Renee,
Can you spell that?
R-E-N-E-E.
Is she still being offered those victim services or services that she was provided before?
Yes, you know, before the incident, we had tried to assist her with some services. And then after the September 23rd incident, we reached out to our partners with the YWCA, and some of the advocates with the YWCA have been in contact with Mrs. Donohue.
Is there any concern about Sergeant Donohue returning to work in terms of how he'll be treated in light of just the allegations in terms of the public and also his coworkers?
It is our hope that he is treated the same that he was before this event. I guess time will tell how he's treated externally. I'm fairly confident that internally he'll be treated fairly and much as he was before. Externally, time will tell, and some of that is your responsibility because you reported this incident very thoroughly when he was arrested, and I would ask that you report this as thoroughly once he has been cleared of these charges.
Can you characterize the services that you've gotten for her? What, I mean,
Yeah.
what kind of services?
Prior to the domestic violence incident, I probably can, and that falls into the arena that I'm not going to speak to Mrs. Donohue's health issues. But after the event, the YWCA reached out to her with the typical services that the YWCA offers, and that is the support for domestic violence victims and all of the other issues that they provide in terms of restraining orders and understanding the nature of domestic violence and lodging or residential options. Now, mind you, those services were offered after the arrest of Sergeant Donohue, but before this morning, and that is when the charges were dropped.
In terms of how the department handled the situation and calling the press conference right when he was arrested, looking back, do you wish you'd waited?
No. I think the biggest disservice I could do to this community and that I could do to Sergeant Donohue is to not share this information and give the appearance that we're trying to hide it. It's quite the opposite. That press conference was called within probably 10 minutes of Sergeant Donohue's arrest. I gave you time to get here, and then we released all information that we could. So no, there's no second thoughts about it. That's the nature of policing. That's the nature of good policing. You know, we share these incidents. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're a bit troubling, but we share it with our officers, we share it with our community, we share it with all of you.
What led to you arresting Sergeant Donohue, given the history of false accusations? Why would you arrest him to begin with?
Yeah, we did not arrest him. The Rock County Sheriff's Department arrested him. And we thought it appropriate to have a separate policing agency conduct that criminal investigation. It was the Rock County Sheriff's Department decision to make that arrest. We didn't interfere with their investigation. We were noticed of the progress of it, but it was really the Sheriff's Department's prerogative and investigation that resulted in that arrest.
And in the internal investigation that revealed no domestic violence had occurred, what did you guys find then? What led you to conclude that?
Yes, we first spoke with Mrs. Donohue, and she had three basic concerns in that first interview. She felt that her husband, Sergeant Donohue, was dying. She believed that she was finding large amounts of blood in the home and thought that Sergeant Donohue was symptomatic of a stroke. So that was one concern. The second concern was that she feared for her safety from Sergeant Donohue. And then the last concern was that she was seeing spirits in her home.
So how, forgive me, but how does that conclude that there was no domestic violence? Just, are you alluding to the fact of her mental?
From that initial interview, we touched and interviewed and spoke to everybody around Mrs. Donohue and Sergeant Donohue, and to a person, all of her friends and immediate family reported us concerns about Mrs. Donohue's truthfulness, and they did not believe that the domestic violence incident occurred.
And then furthermore, the DA, it had said, didn't find enough evidence. Is that true then, that?
Yeah, now, after this first internal investigation, when we determined that there was no domestic violence, that had concluded, and then after that, we had the domestic violence incident, alleged domestic violence incident where Mrs. Donohue displayed injuries. And it was that investigation that was forwarded to the district attorney, and that he determined that there was not cause to charge Sergeant Donohue, and the charges were dropped.
Chief, was there an internal investigation after the arrest, and then what's the status of that?
Yeah, once the criminal investigation started, we conducted our own internal investigation, and the results of that, well, first of all, I'll need to tell you what the Sheriff's Department learned in their criminal investigation, because that gives meaning to the findings of our internal investigation. In the Sheriff's Department's criminal investigation, as I said, Mrs. Donohue insisted that the assault occurred. Sergeant Donohue insists that he never encountered his wife during this time frame. Mrs. Donohue says that she went to the home that day, September 22nd, at 6 a.m. and stayed there until the time of the assault. After the assault, she went directly to her friend's home where she is staying, spoke to no one else, and stayed at the friend's home for the remainder of the day and the evening. I'm going to say that again. She says she was at the family home there from 6 a.m. until the time of the assault, which was about 10:30 a.m. After the assault, she went directly to her friend's home where she is staying. She spoke with no one and stayed at the friend's home for the remainder of the day and the evening. So our second internal investigation revealed the following. One neighbor says that no one was at the Donohue home before 10 o'clock a.m. on the 22nd. No cars were present. The neighbor did see Mrs. Donohue arrive at the home at 1 o'clock p.m. to pick up the mail and then left. And that would be contrary to her statement to the Sheriff's Department. And I got to tell you, she was very clear about her activities to the Sheriff's Department. Another neighbor saw Mrs. Donohue arrive at the home at 10 a.m., between 10 a.m. and 10:30 a.m., again contrary to what she told the Sheriff's Department. Mrs. Donohue's roommate reports that she She was not at the home at 3 o'clock p.m. when he had returned to the home, again contrary to her statement. We interviewed a bartender at Diamond Dave's bar in town here, and this bartender reports that Mrs. Donohue arrived at the bar between noon and 12:30, and that was within 2 hours of this alleged assault. Mrs. Donohue was in a happy and bubbly mood and said that she was going shopping. This bartender, although she was in a position to see the injury, did not see any injuries, and there was no discussion about the assault. When we brought this fact to Mrs. Donohue's, when we discussed that with her, Mrs. Donohue changed her story. She says, yes, that she had gone to the bar. She said that the bartender had noticed the injury, asked her about her eye, and Mrs. Donohue says that she reported the assault to the bartender and was crying. Clearly, that's not the information we received from the bartender at Diamond Dave's. That's in conflict. So those are the issues that the internal investigation revealed, contrary to what she reported to the Sheriff's Department in the criminal investigation.
Chief, moving forward, your department is working real hard to educate and also assist victims of domestic violence. How are you going to reassure the community after all this that, you know, that people are still free to come forward and you're still here for them and you're continuing your efforts? I mean, a bit of a perceptual concern. What are you going to do to reassure the community?
Well, I think there are two things. I would have to believe that we have earned some goodwill in this community as to our approach to domestic violence. We have an award-winning domestic violence team. We've been noticed by the governor's office. We have a long history of supporting victims of domestic violence. We receive statewide recognition, and we assist other police agencies in building strong domestic violence teams. So I think we've built, I would hope, some very goodwill in this community and have a long track history on it. I would also believe that being as open as we are with this incident, that would also assure the community that we investigate domestic violence. There's no preferential treatment given to police officers when a domestic violence incident occurs, and that they are thoroughly investigated. So I think those two issues will help us through this.
How is Sergeant Donohue doing in terms of how comfortable he's feeling being at the department after all of this, and the fact that he was arrested and this information was made public?
He's yet to step foot in this department since he's been under administrative leave. He'll be back next Monday, so I think that would be a better question after he's back for a week. I can tell you that this was devastating to Sergeant Donohue. He is a well-respected officer in this agency. He is a deeply respected person in this community. And to go from that level of respect to seeing a mugshot and an article of your arrest on the front page of the paper and in the media is very difficult. He knows in his heart that he did not do this. He had believed in the system and felt that this day would come, but it was very difficult for the sergeant.
Is he still living in his home then, separated from his wife?
Yes.
And was their marriage annulled? Because I've seen reports that it's divorced, annulled. Do you know?
As best I know, the divorce proceedings are started.
Are started, okay, okay, I had read that they had an annulment, but again, that's why I wanted to.
Yeah, my best information is that the divorce proceedings have started, and we all know that takes some time.
Will Sergeant Donohue return to the same job duties he had previously?
Yes.
Will there be any debrief period when he returns to the department on Monday?
Yes, we will be meeting with the sergeant and make sure that he is working through this okay. We have talked to him since District Attorney David O'Leary's decision. We believe that he's doing well and sorting through this okay.
And as far as, I know it's pretty typical for officers when they're patrolling or close to their home to stop by their home and, like you said, use the restroom, get a drink. Is the police going to be tightening down on not allowing that, or is it still no concern with that then? Because
No, there's no concern. This was no, there's no concern with that.
He's not a patrol officer, correct?
Right, but he frequently is out in the field, and on that particular day, he was meeting with a business in the neighborhood and decided to stop by, use the restroom, and grab a soda.
Do you think I don't know if this is an appropriate question, do you think the sheriff's office was correct in making the arrest?
I can tell you that this was a very difficult situation for the Rock County Sheriff's Department. None of us look forward to these types of investigations. We asked for their assistance. I think they did the best that they could. They came to the conclusion that an arrest was appropriate. It was not our place to question that arrest, but it is our responsibility to conduct an internal investigation, because this very easily could have resulted in the firing of Sergeant Donohue, and to go to that level of discipline requires an internal investigation. And it was during that separate internal investigation that we discovered information that was relative to the criminal investigation, and we shared that with the district attorney.
And then the second, so her second, when was the first domestic violence report, and did she call in that one? I know the roommate called in the second one, but.
Right, yeah, the first one was on August 24th. She was out for a walk in the neighborhood, and she encountered one of our police officers out working in his lawn. And when she encountered him, she mentioned that she was in fear of Sergeant Donohue. She also mentioned her concerns for Sergeant Donohue's health issues. But once she said she had those fear concerns and safety concerns, the officer did the right thing. He